Are you losing track of your IT assets? In this video, I'm going to outline ways to help you track, maintain, and optimize your IT assets. Hello and welcome to The Prime Concern, a video series that helps you navigate critical IT decisions and use IT services to your advantage. I'm Justin Eckstein, and I bring about 2 decades of IT experience to the table, half of which have been spent deep within the world of managed IT services. So many businesses out there struggle with tracking their device inventory and planning for the refresh cycles, maintenance schedules, and really everything in between. Let's take a moment to press pause and think through how we can take back control of our assets. So let's start with tracking our IT assets. If we don't know what we have, we can't very well manage them. I was just recently talking to a business that had what we found were about twice as many computers as what they actually needed. They had desktops and laptops and really everything in between. What we found was that really the majority of their employees were just using the laptops, and the desktops were just kind of sitting there collecting dust. So I think probably one of the most critical things that we just need to start with is just getting an asset inventory and understanding what we have. And then from there, we can kind of figure out what we really need. The asset inventory, it can be something as simple as really just a spreadsheet. And there are a number of different software packages out there that you can use, but just getting a list and starting there, starting with the models, and then we can get the serial numbers and everything from there. We can then take that asset inventory and we can take it a step further with actual monitoring software. So for computers and servers, there's things called RMMs, or remote monitoring and management utilities. And those are actual pieces of software that get installed on the computers and the servers, and then they can give us all sorts of information. But there are also tools out there for tracking things like your firewalls and your network switches and your wireless access points and all the other devices out there. So there are really what we would call network monitoring softwares that we can use that can help then take inventories of those devices as well. So between maybe 1 or 2 software packages, you can get live inventories of all of the information and all the devices that you have out there. From there, we can then track things like purchase dates and the warranties and the locations and who's actually logging into the devices, and are they even online or are they turned off? So just that kind of live information and understanding what's there is critical, because that's kind of how we uncovered it with that business that had really twice as many devices. We found that a lot of them just weren't even getting logged into, and maybe they were just turned off for long periods of time. People didn't even really know that they were there. So that's a great way of just understanding what's actively in use and are things not even really getting used the way you expect them to. These utilities can also do things like help you get control of your software licensing and really the software that's out there. I've seen a lot of businesses where they've, after going through some of these exercises, they found that there's software out there that they didn't even know existed, and it was getting thrown on different company credit cards, and they didn't really have a way to track it. Having some of these software packages then can allow you to run reports and understand what's installed on different computers and servers. Are devices like your firewalls and your switches out of date on old versions of software and firmware? And so it can really help you get a handle on all of that and the versions that are out there, and also the licenses that are out there, and just some of the costs that you might be throwing away by maybe not buying in bulk, for example. I came across one business that was surprised by some end of life by Adobe with their Adobe Acrobat licensing. And they started getting these pop-up messages on their computers saying that there's features that are going to get disabled. And when I took a look at it, I said, yeah, these are really old versions of Adobe that you probably shouldn't have out there anymore. But they didn't know that, and they didn't have a way of tracking it. So having just some of these basic tools in place and reviewing some of these reports and the licensing out there can help you get ahead of things like that, because that ended up being an unexpected cost for them. They weren't expecting to have to drop hundreds of dollars in new Adobe licensing, for example, and now they're on these subscription payments that they weren't expecting. So just spending a little bit of time there can really save you a lot of money and time and energy later on. So now that we have the basics down, how do we really maintain these devices? I come across, it seems like every day, I'm talking to a new business where I find that they just have what we call end-of-life devices in use. And it's not just computers or servers, but also things like the firewalls, the switches, the wireless access points, the battery backups. All of these things are really kind of a computer at the end of the day. And they have a supported or expected life cycle by the manufacturer. What you need to understand is that when these devices get installed, there's usually an expected lifespan there. And if you keep that device past that lifespan, or maybe you don't keep the software maintenance up, that device might not be supported anymore, which can cause all sorts of problems. It can create software vulnerabilities, which makes it easier for a hacker to get into your network. It also creates support issues where maybe we can't get updates on the device anymore, or we can't make certain configuration changes to the device anymore. And if you're running into performance problems or reliability issues, and we don't have support contracts or the ability to contact the manufacturer and get assistance, we might be kind of up a creek without a paddle and not be able to make the changes that we need. So I've come across a lot of businesses out there where they end up having these old devices and they had really no idea that these things were end of support. But they've just been sitting there and they've been working and kind of doing their job. You haven't really noticed anything major. But then when you start to really look at it, you realize, wow, these haven't been updated. They haven't been touched. We've been lucky that they haven't just broken at some point, but we need to get ahead of that and make sure that we're replacing these things on a consistent life cycle, and also updating them and maintaining them and treating them like they're critical part of our business, because they really are. This kind of goes into some of the patching and compliance checks that we should be doing with these devices. So we need to make sure that not only our computers and our servers, but also all of our network devices are actually getting updated regularly. That's something that I find oftentimes they just kind of sit there and kind of rot in a lot of ways. People aren't really looking at these things very closely and making sure that they're getting updated regularly. There's a lot of issues out there and bugs and things that can be taken advantage of also by an attacker. We also can look at things like performance of these devices too, and understanding whether maybe a workstation, a server, or a network device just aren't performing well. Maybe they're getting overloaded, or maybe they're overheating. So there's a lot of things that we can take a look at there and maybe get ahead of things before it creates a real problem. And we can notice that, hey, there's something a little odd going on here. This is working a lot harder than it normally should. And maybe that might point out some other issues that we really weren't aware of. We also need to think about backups of the data and some of the configurations with these devices. Obviously, we want to back up things like servers and maybe workstations if they have critical information on them. But I think a lot of people don't even consider backing up things like the configurations of their firewalls and their switches and their wireless access points. Those devices are generally pretty critical to the business. When you think about a firewall, for example, all of your internet traffic is going through there for all of your devices. And if that device were to fail, how quickly are you going to be able to get it back up and running, or maybe a replacement in place? And is there a bunch of configuration changes that you're going to have to make, and are you going to waste hours of time getting it right? Without a backup configuration, that can take some time. A lot of these monitoring tools out there will actually allow you to take up backup of devices like your firewalls and your switches, and have a whole configuration of all the changes that have been made. And then when you have an outage situation, or you need to replace the device, you can actually grab that backup configuration file and upload it and be up and running really quickly. We also need to think about the support contracts. Oftentimes, I think people tend to forget about things like their server warranty, their firewall warranty, and the support contract with that, and even things like their switches and some of their other devices out there. We need to understand when those expire, and we need to document that so that we can make sure that we, if we deem it's a critical device, that we actually get that renewed and extended if we need to. Or if it's not possible to extend it, at least we are then aware and maybe can budget a little bit better for replacing that device or maybe having a spare on hand if we need to. That kind of goes into the whole budgeting conversation. I think this is something that a lot of small businesses really struggle with, is understanding how to just budget for replacement for devices. I think probably the easiest thing to do is just to get on some kind of standard cycle that works for your business. Oftentimes I suggest somewhere in that maybe 5 to 7 years on some of the devices, like some of the network equipment. You can usually keep a little longer than you might maybe a computer, just because computers have generally more moving parts and they kind of get banged around a little bit more. Then the network devices usually just kind of sit there. They don't really ever get touched. They might not have any moving parts in them, so it's less likely for them to have a failure of some kind. So having some kind of budgetary life cycle and real plan in place, I usually suggest that you have a 3-year plan for major device replacement. That way when it comes to budgeting time, nothing's really a surprise. A lot of businesses out there, when they don't do things like some of this budgetary planning, you end up with these surprise replacement costs. And some of these can be significant. A server, for example, if you're not planning on having to replace it, that can be tens of thousands of dollars potentially. And a firewall can be thousands of dollars. So again, budgeting properly can really help cut down those surprise replacement costs. In my opinion, when it comes to technology in a business, you really shouldn't have any technology expenditure surprise costs that are more than maybe a couple $1,000s for maybe a workstation or something like that. If we take all this a step further, how can we then optimize our business assets? So, kind of back to the discovering that you had twice as many computers than what you needed in the business. How do we capture that and prevent that from happening in the first place? If you think about that, somebody was spending money on desktops and laptops, and they kept replacing them, right? But then they realized they didn't really need that. So that can be, a 50% savings at the end of the day when you're not spending money on computers that you just don't need anymore. So one thing that you can do is you can utilize, or you can analyze usage patterns. So an example would be using something like the RMM or the remote monitoring tools out there and seeing which devices are actually getting logged into. Are they online? Are they offline for long periods of time? Or maybe there's just not a lot of usage there. Maybe they get logged into, but it's a once a week thing that maybe that specialty computer gets used for. So you can start to look at patterns and whether or not a device is really used very often. And then from there, you can understand, do we really even need to replace that computer? Can we consolidate that down into maybe 3 computers can become 1 machine, for example? Standardizing software and hardware is also a key piece within this. I've come across a lot of businesses out there where it's just kind of a smattering of devices and brands and all sorts of things out there. That can be kind of hard to control and then understand what people really even need. If you have kind of a standard that all of your employees get, and then maybe you have a few employees that maybe are a little bit more heavy hitters, they maybe do more design work or something like that. Maybe they need a slightly more powerful machine. It can just be a lot easier to manage. And then it can also make it easier for you to optimize costs because maybe you can buy in bulk if you're getting all of the same device. And then you can get some kind of bulk savings, for example. You also need to be able to understand when to decommission end-of-life assets. I think being able to plan ahead for that is critical. It can make sure that things aren't going to be kept around longer than they need to. Oftentimes I think it just kind of gets forgotten about. I tend to see a lot of businesses that end up with computers that are 7, 8, 9 years old. And that's great that they've lasted that long. But what they don't realize is that employee that's using that device is probably silently just suffering, because over time you just kind of get used to using a slow computer and you don't even realize it sometimes. But making sure you have that regular life cycle management process can make sure that employees are actually using capable machines and they're not wasting their or your time. You can also then make sure that you are able to adjust your procurement needs at the end of the day. So you can make sure that you're not purchasing devices that you don't need. You can also make sure that you're maybe purchasing on a regular life cycle. It becomes easier to budget because of that. So things just kind of start to fall in place when you just spend a little bit of time managing them. What I've found is that it can be kind of annoying, I think, to try and maintain an asset inventory list in the beginning because it feels like it's so much work. It's just so hard to get a handle on all of it and wrap it all up. But at the end of the day, if you just put a little bit of effort into managing your assets, you can truly save a lot long term. Asset management can often seem like a huge time sink without really a huge upside, but when you consider how quickly you can get your inventory under control and how much time and money it can really save you in the long run, once a good baseline has been established, it quickly becomes a no-brainer. Thanks for watching today's video. If you would like to learn more, click the link in the description.